A few years ago, I started noticing something strange. The people around me hadn't changed. My workplace was the same. My friends were the same. My family was the same. But somehow, the more I paid attention, the less human behavior made sense, until I discovered a few psychological theories that sounded completely crazy, and suddenly, everything made sense. I remember a period in my life when I thought I was pretty good at understanding people. Not perfectly, of course. But I believed I could usually tell when someone was being honest, when they cared, or when they were making a bad decision. I worked in a busy office back then. Every day followed a familiar routine. Morning coffee. Meetings. Emails. Small conversations near the break room. Nothing unusual. Yet certain patterns kept bothering me. One coworker constantly complained about being overworked. Every week, he talked about stress and burnout. But whenever someone offered help, he refused it. Another coworker always talked about wanting a promotion. She worked hard and stayed late. But when leadership opportunities appeared, she quietly stepped back. I remember thinking, why do people say they want one thing but repeatedly do another? At first, I assumed they were simply inconsistent. Maybe everyone was. But then I started noticing the same thing in myself. I would tell myself I wanted more free time. Yet somehow, I filled every empty evening with tasks. I said I wanted less stress. Yet I constantly checked work emails after hours. The contradiction bothered me. One afternoon, while reading about psychology, I came across something called cognitive dissonance. The idea sounded almost too simple. When our actions and beliefs don't match, our brains become uncomfortable. And instead of changing our behavior, we often change our explanations. Suddenly, dozens of situations from my life made sense. The coworker wasn't refusing help because he wanted to suffer. Accepting help would force him to admit he couldn't handle everything alone. The discomfort of that realization was stronger than the discomfort of stress. And maybe my endless work habits weren't because I loved being productive. Maybe I had built part of my identity around being busy. That realization stayed with me for days. But it wasn't the only strange thing I discovered. A few weeks later, something happened that seemed completely unrelated. I was meeting a friend for lunch. I arrived early and found a table near the window. As people walked by outside, I started making assumptions. That person looks confident. That person seems impatient. That person looks unhappy. The judgments happened automatically. Then my friend arrived. We started talking, and at one point he mentioned a difficult situation involving a neighbor. Without thinking, I immediately blamed the neighbor. My friend paused. Then he explained a few details I didn't know. Within seconds, my opinion completely changed. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how quickly I'd formed conclusions with almost no information. That's when I discovered another psychological theory. The fundamental attribution error. A complicated name for something surprisingly common. We tend to explain other people's behavior through their personality while explaining our own behavior through circumstances. If someone cuts us off in traffic, we think they're rude. If we cut someone off, it's because we're running late. If someone else misses a deadline, they're irresponsible. If we miss a deadline, we had a legitimate reason. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable it became. I realized how often I judged people based on incomplete information. Not because I was a bad person. Because my brain naturally preferred simple explanations. Human behavior suddenly looked less mysterious. And a lot more complicated. Then came a theory that genuinely changed how I viewed relationships. It started with a misunderstanding. A close friend stopped replying to my messages. Not completely. Just less often. The responses became shorter. Days passed before hearing back. I tried not to think about it. But I did. I remember wondering whether I had done something wrong. Maybe I had annoyed him. Maybe he didn't value the friendship anymore. Maybe he was intentionally creating distance. The longer I thought about it, the more convincing those explanations became. Then eventually we met. Within 10 minutes, I learned he'd been dealing with serious family problems. Nothing about our friendship had changed. His attention had simply been pulled elsewhere. I felt embarrassed. Not because I had asked questions. Because I had created an entire story without evidence. That's when I learned about something called the spotlight effect. Most of us believe people notice us far more than they actually do. We think others are constantly evaluating our actions, analyzing our mistakes, and reacting to our behavior. But in reality, most people are focused on themselves. Just like we are. That theory sounded strange at first. Yet it explained so much anxiety. How many sleepless nights had I spent replaying conversations that everyone else had already forgotten? How many assumptions had I made because I believed someone's actions were about me? Probably more than I wanted to admit. Around that time, another experience challenged me in an unexpected way. I was helping interview candidates for a position at work. One applicant arrived perfectly dressed. Confident handshake. Strong eye contact. Smooth conversation. Everyone liked him immediately. Another applicant seemed nervous. He stumbled over a few answers. His presentation wasn't nearly as polished. Yet after several rounds of interviews, something surprising happened. The second candidate turned out to be significantly more qualified. His work history was stronger. His skills were stronger. His references were stronger. And yet almost everyone initially preferred the first candidate. Why? Because of something psychologists call the halo effect. When we notice one positive trait, we often assume other positive traits exist too. Attractive people seem smarter. Confident people seem more competent. Friendly people seem more trustworthy. The scary part wasn't learning the theory. The scary part was realizing how often it happened without my awareness. Suddenly, I began noticing it everywhere. In advertising. In politics. In workplaces. Even in friendships. Perception wasn't always reality. Sometimes perception quietly created reality. Then came the theory that affected me the most. Not because it explained others. Because it explained me. I was sitting alone one evening after a frustrating week. Several things hadn't gone as planned. Projects stalled. Goals moved slower than expected. Nothing catastrophic. Just disappointing. I remember thinking about all the reasons things weren't working. Bad timing. Difficult circumstances. Unhelpful people. Then I stumbled across a psychological concept called self-serving bias. The idea was uncomfortable. We tend to credit ourselves for successes and blame outside factors for failures. When things go well, it's our talent. When things go badly, it's the situation. At first, I resisted the idea. Then I started examining recent events honestly. And I found examples everywhere. Not all failures were someone else's fault. Not all successes belonged entirely to me. The truth sat somewhere in the middle. That realization didn't make me feel worse. Oddly, it made me feel freer. Because if I wasn't responsible for every success, I also wasn't doomed by every failure. Human behavior became less about blame and more about understanding. Over time, these theories started connecting together. Cognitive dissonance explained why people defend contradictions. The fundamental attribution error explained why we misjudge others. The spotlight effect explained unnecessary anxiety. The halo effect explained misleading first impressions. Self-serving bias explained how we protect our self-image. Individually, each theory seemed interesting. Together, they revealed something much bigger. Most people aren't irrational. They're human. Including me. The behaviors that once seemed confusing suddenly looked predictable. Not because people are simple. Because all of us are trying to navigate reality using imperfect mental shortcuts. That realization changed how I reacted to others. When someone became defensive, I became more curious. When someone made a poor decision, I stopped assuming I knew the full story. When someone disappointed me, I became slower to judge. Not always. But more often than before. The biggest shift wasn't intellectual. It was emotional. I started realizing that many conflicts begin long before words are exchanged. They begin inside our interpretations. Inside assumptions. Inside invisible stories we tell ourselves about other people. And those stories are often wrong. Looking back, what fascinates me most isn't that these psychological theories exist. It's that they quietly influence everyday life. At work. In relationships. In arguments. In decisions. In moments we barely notice. They sound crazy at first because they challenge something most of us believe. That we're seeing people exactly as they are. But maybe we're not. Maybe we're seeing them through filters created by our experiences, fears, assumptions, and perceptions. And maybe everyone else is doing the same thing. That thought has stayed with me ever since. Because every person we meet is carrying invisible explanations, hidden motivations, private struggles, and unconscious biases. Just like we are. And sometimes the difference between judgment and empathy is simply recognizing how little of another person's story we can actually see. The older I get, the less interested I become in deciding whether people are good or bad, right or wrong. I'm more interested in understanding what invisible forces might be shaping their behavior. Because once you start noticing those forces, people don't become easier to predict. They become easier to understand. And maybe that's the real lesson psychology teaches us. Not how to control people. Not how to outsmart them. But how to see them more clearly. Because the most powerful perspective shift isn't discovering how strange human behavior can be. It's discovering that behind almost every confusing action is a reason we simply haven't seen yet. And if that's true, how many people have we misunderstood simply because we never looked beyond our first explanation?